Ladies and gentlemen, introducing our esteemed group of panelists, first and foremost, Mr. Sunil Mathur, Managing Director and CEO, Siemens Limited. Can we have a round of applause, please? Welcome, sir. Up next, we have Ms. Vanitha Narayanan, Managing Director, IBM India Private Limited. We can do with a much bigger round of applause if you have beautiful ladies on stage. Up next, we have Dr. Chandan Chowdhury, Managing Director, Dassault Systems India Private Limited. Welcome, sir. Up next, we have Mr. Vinayak Chatterjee, Chairman, Feedback Infra Private Limited. Welcome, sir. And of course, we have our beautiful moderator, Miss Aditi Phadnis, Political Editor, Business Standard. Over to you, ma'am.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, it's that time of the day again when a heavy weight seems to settle around your middle. And try as you might, your eyes don't stay open and your mind seems to be full of cotton wool. Well, I have a stellar panel here today, so I hope that's going to shake you out of your post-lunch torpor. We are discussing governing the ungovernable. This is actually quite a complex and quite a deep idea, which was developed by a political theorist called James Rosenau in the early 1980s. And what he argued was that in the context of globalization, how do individuals and states respond to turbulence? So you have three balls up in the air. One is that of globalization, the other is that of states and individuals, and you have turbulence. So how do all these three things come together to settle down in some order? And does it become ungovernable or is it still governable? So that was quite a complex formulation, but in India's current context, Rosenau's ideas can be applied to simple formulations. Should Indian roads be built using PPP, EPC, Swiss challenge? Which model should they adopt? What is the best and most optimal way of transforming a decrepit airport in a tier 2 city, which has 2 scarcely used runways because there's no capacity, hidden ATC capacity and capability, and immense real estate development? How should we go about this? Who should pay for garbage clearance? This is a problem that Delhi kind of grappled with not so long ago, and I suspect it's going to come up again because nobody wants to pay and everyone wants their garbage cleared. It's bound to recur. Can smart cities, the creation of smart cities, really be entrusted to state governments? State governments which continue to rule a 5-year term after 5-year term after 5-year term by simple sleight of hand of changing the faces of the MLAs that they field, so people gullible and sort of easily fooled as they are, think that they're voting for a whole new party. It's the same people, the same ideas, the same interests, and nothing seems to change in some states, which I hesitate to name here because we all know which ones we are talking about. I would like to kick off the discussion by inviting Sunil to discuss what he thinks the challenge really is. The challenge of governing the ungovernable in terms of Indian cities, Indian towns, in terms of urban areas, in terms of constituencies, in terms of the various stakes that are involved in the making of modern India.
Thank you very much. I think that's a huge question, which is very, very difficult to answer. But I think the issue of smart cities, per se, the concept of smart cities, I'm convinced is exactly the right thing that needs to be done for this country. It is also true that the government cannot do it themselves. So one has to have private sector participation in it. I think the challenges that one faces in the smart cities in particular is how are we going to actually go around and implement this? Now, the governance part of it is one thing, and that's when we get into the detailing of what needs to be done city by city, which is going to have to be done each city on its own merits. But I think the bigger issue in rolling out this smart city concept is who is going to take a decision and how are we going to implement what is right for the city. Now, I know there has been a discussion regarding having a special purpose vehicle with a CEO responsible for it. But maybe just to illustrate the point, we tried to set up an integrated traffic management system in a radius of 5 kilometers around our office. Now, this is not rocket science. This is basically applying sensors into the traffic lights, feeding them back into a central command and control center, which then would direct traffic based on its density and speed and so on. Now, we thought we would do this as a case just to demonstrate what can be done. But when we started trying to implement that, we discovered we would need 35 approvals to do that. And these 35 approvals were from everyone from the police department to the municipal corporation to the city development to the electricity department, etc., the water department, and so on. So that is a challenge that we are facing right now in actually implementing the smart city solution. The question really is, if you bring in a special purpose vehicle and you do bring in a CEO, will this CEO be empowered to take the decisions that were earlier being taken by 35 different agencies, none of whom talk to each other, and none of which were absolutely aligned on what they want to do? And if so, is the regulatory environment in place to allow him to do that? Now, electricity is a concurrent subject. How are we going to decide whether you want SCADA systems in a city without involving the center, the state, and the city? So is that going to be a decision that can be taken by the city CEO? Frankly, nowhere around the world has this actually worked. But these are questions that are still very much on the table. And I think one of the issues that we probably need to debate on is, have we really thought this concept through right to the end? Do we know where we are headed? Or is this an evolutionary process, which is also okay? But then we need to enable or create an environment that enables private sector to work together with the city authorities, the state authorities, and the central authorities to be able to implement what is right city by city. Because it's not going to be one size fits all.
Vinayak, if I may come to you, there are so many paradoxes in our country. You have a place which is being fed, which the drinking water for 21 days, you don't get, your taps are dry. You have to carry water in a train, in several trains in fact. At the same time, you're planning a city which has a fiber optic network where, and please excuse me for sounding naive, but I was absolutely enthralled at the idea that I could turn on the air conditioner in my house from my office. So Gift City is supposedly planned like that. Now you have this vast gulf between basic infrastructure not being there and frankly cities having ideas beyond their station. How do we resolve this?
Complicated question, as Sunil also tried addressing. Since this session is about cities and states, I will restrict my comments to 3 bullet points. two to do with cities and one to do with states, in terms of what are the real priorities. If you step back on city governance, the real issue is how are cities governed. In the period till 51, when the Constitution was written, our founding fathers hadn't quite grasped the enormous size and economic power that cities would end up wielding at the turn of the century or even before that. So constitutionally, we have actually set governance standards at central level, state level, and the intersection of the two sets, which we call the concurrent list. Nowhere in the original Constitution did you have much of the framework laid out for city governance, which is the third tier of government. The fourth tier is, of course, the Panchayati Raj. I'm not touching it right. Now, the challenge that we are facing now, so many decades after independence, is that effectively we do not have a constitutional structure which forces us to govern our cities in a pre-planned manner. Now, this was recognized from the early 80s when cities started getting unmanageable. And therefore, we've had one of the most historic interventions that a nation, a democracy can have, which is a constitutional amendment. So in 1992, we had the 74th Amendment to the Constitution, which enjoined urban reforms. In a simple phrase, basically all that was done in the 74th Amendment was a series of administrative orders which enjoined cities to pick up their own destinies in terms of property taxes, projects, citizen services, governance, etc. Unfortunately, the implementation of the 74th Amendment meant that the state capitals of all our 29 states had to give up political power in favor of the mayoral system in the third tier, and therefore was effectively blocked. It was not allowed to perform. And why only blame the politicians? In civil society, people like us, media, courts, etc., all of us who champion various causes, whether it is electoral reforms or judicial reforms or GST or whatever, effectively, if you look back, there has been very little activism on implementation of the 74th Amendment. So what we have, an unworkable governance structure for the third tier of administration of this country, is something we can ourselves blame for, because we have a constitutional amendment. You can't get more serious than that, and yet we don't make it work. So that's my first comment, that there has to be, and I even appeal to you from the media and many other civil society organizations, we have to pick up a certain level of activism on pushing the political and the bureaucratic system to push the provisions of the 74th Amendment. The second point on cities takes off from a point Sunil made, which is about the fact that the smart cities business has actually created a new animal called an SPV, a special purpose vehicle where the new repository of funds from the center, state, and the contributions from the private and multilateral and institutional sectors broadly called PPP is going to be funneled into not the municipal corporation, but into this new administrative entity called SPV. So if all goes well, smart city or non-smart city, whatever it is, if the SPV is the one that has the funds, and it is the SPV that is going to undertake all these smart city type of projects, from optic fiber to 24/7 water supply to garbage to all that stuff, you have a very dichotomous situation in the same city where the municipal corporation is the one that has the legal right to collect property taxes, to administer justice, to fine people, etc. And you have a different vehicle called an SPV, which is sitting on a pile of cash, which is supposed to implement the projects and collect user utilities from them. So our cities are going to have this twin structure. And I'm not very sure whether enough thought has gone in to how to manage this twin structure of a financially robust SPV twinned with a decadent municipal corporation structure, and it is this twin engine that is supposed to make our cities come alive in a 21st century sense. So I'm parking the issue. I don't have a solution, but we better find one soon, because many of these smart cities have already started setting up the SPVs, and many of them will soon be in the market asking for funds. The governance system between the two is clearly unknown. The last point I want to make I'm moving from the states to from the cities to the states. If you ask me what, as we were discussing a little over lunch, what would keep me awake at night? Certainly in today's context, what would keep me awake at night would be the water crisis. But somewhere along the line, every year the water crisis discussions peak around end April, May, and by the time the rains come, we have moved on to floods, onto a separate topic. But if I were to be kept awake at midnight for the full year, I would worry about electricity distribution. much of what we are talking about in the country today at the state level, whether it is self-employment, small and medium enterprises, everybody trying to become entrepreneurs and running their own machine shops or small industries, students studying at night, everything that you do requires electricity. And unfortunately, while we have solved the fuel and the generation side of the business, this country remains completely screwed up on the electricity generation front. And all kinds of financial, shall I say, resetting of bonds to state governments and UDA and others is fine at one level. Because it takes care of the broad finances, prevents NPAs of the banks, all that kind of stuff. But at the grassroots level, unfortunately, the entire Indian subcontinent across the last 50 years has been emasculated by entities that were called the state electricity boards earlier and are called discoms today. That situation, for somebody like me who knows the innards, looks to be beyond repair. You can't get that same system to start outperforming now. You'll either have to have a bypass or completely create a new system. And therefore, the private interventions in electricity distribution need to gather momentum. Something drastic has to be done about the electricity distribution framework to pull states up. Otherwise, you're going to get more movies like I don't know how many of you have seen the Kanpur story in a documentary called Katiabaz, but that movie can be made, since India has thousands of, 6,000 towns, you can make that movie 6,000 times over. So if you ask me, the single biggest worry for me at the Sigma state level is complete resetting of the electricity distribution framework, including regulatory, tariffs, and the last mile connectivity. But let me stop here.
I'd like to come to you, Vanitha. You've lived all over the world, I'm sure. You know India's situation. Is it time to bury legacy issues forever and kind of bury them so deep, like the issue of modernizing state electricity boards? Everybody has their own private electricity generating system. Everyone has their own borewell. Everyone has their own water. Kind of privatizing every home, as it were. Or do we still need a cooperative structure? I remember talking to somebody about why India can never be great. And I said, well, there are three reasons why India can never be great. One is pan. Everyone thinks that they don't have to clean it up. So, the other guy will come and clean it up. The second is loudspeakers. Because the louder your voice, the other guys will be even louder. And then the other guys will be even louder. How can you have a civilized discourse when all you're trying to do is make your voice louder than the other guys? And the third is, general lack of responsibility, civic responsibility. So, what are your thoughts on this? How can we create a city that is responsible?
Wow. So a couple of things. One, I think India has been great, and there are parts where we can show greatness again and have. And it really is about when it becomes a priority and it has a viral movement, a positive viral movement that makes it happen. Let's take another utility. When I talked about electricity boards, and about a decade ago, we all thought smart grid, smart metering, and very quickly you find out it's not about technology. It's not about smart grids or smart metering. It really is understanding the entire ecosystem, all of the places where the ecosystem is actually structured to be dysfunctional, and then there is a lack of incentives in terms of collaborating. So if you in fact projected that you were going to have a very hot summer and you bought, quote unquote, a set of power that you couldn't use, then it was on you. You couldn't trade on it, actively, dynamically. There could be another part of the country that didn't. So it really comes down to a couple of things: governance, and if you go back to private versus public, the phone service is a perfect example. When I left India in 1981, and my parents moved, they moved cities, and it took them 8 years to get a phone line. They had moved out of there before, so contacting was very difficult. So when we saw the telecom revolution through privatization, India in the fixed line world, we abandoned it. We leapfrogged really. If you looked at 2G, we were about 12 years behind the rest of the world. If you look at 3G, we were about 5 or 6 years behind the rest of the world. 4G, we're about 2 years behind the most advanced countries. So, and we have one of the most populated, mobile penetrated societies. So it is possible. And there's no reason why power cannot be so. And again, just as we looked at completely leapfrogging fixed line and going to mobile, if you look at power, you have traditional power, but you also have the new sources of power, whether it's solar, whether it's wind, all of the other sustainable energy models. So it really is about getting some decisions made which say, yes, I might have to privatize some things, let go of certain models that we've held on to, and really incent a set of private-public players, and the business relationship can vary, which incent them to create capability because power becomes quite foundational to any kind of growth and any kind of smart city. You've got the utilities that have to be in place. But your other question in terms of the softer skills, we talk about governance and we talk about good governance, because at the end of the day, whether it's central, state, city, panchayat, community, company, project, program, it comes down to good governance when there's success. And this, I think, to me, goes back, there's no quick fix. And someone's got to sort of bite the bullet and say, it's about education. And really, it's skills and education. And if there's one thing that we standardize and raise the quality of, it's a better educational model that's more future-ready than rote memorization and testing. Building a learning culture and a responsible culture. And I remember reading one of the articles, which I thought was probably a really good suggestion. We talk about Japan and we talk about Japanese being really clean. And we talked about Swachh Bharat. We can build toilets, but someone has to keep them clean on an ongoing basis. To your point, I can't expect somebody to come and clean up my mess. And if you go back, and I think the article went on to say that Japanese kids, right from kindergarten, when they go to school, and they're asked to buy their books and bring their books to school, part of their supplies is bringing a couple of napkins. Every day when they leave school, they clean their desk and they put away their napkins. So you start with a learning culture that you clean up before yourself, after yourself, and you leave it better than you found it. So some of these can be, if you will, business model. Some can be technology enabled. And every day, every year, we have new options available, better options available. But some of the more foundational, softer skills, issues of values, and sustainability will have to be addressed, I think, at the grassroots, right from primary education.
So, Chandan, this is all about responsibility. And technology is an enabler. Democracy is, could maybe elevate levels, but ultimately it's about responsibility. How responsive do you find the state in its responsibilities?
Yeah, I think, you have posed a very interesting question. And I wanted to share with you one perspective. So many complex problems that we have right now in cities, it may be pollution, it may be shortage of water, it may be, energy shortage. I think one thing that we need to do, whether it is with respect to state or cities, that we need to leverage science. And many problems that we have in cities, I think we need to combine art, science, technology, and emotion. I'll give you a very simple example to illustrate what I'm saying. There are models available today. You can actually model a city. It may be an existing city, it may be a satellite city, or it may be an absolutely greenfield city. So number one, you can model a city. Number two, you can superimpose the transportation system, waste management system, water management system, and various other systems. Including, you can actually shake a city with an earthquake, if it is in an earthquake-prone zone. You can impose a tsunami if it is a city which is close to. Now, the point that I've been trying to create awareness that we need to really leverage science, because the problems that we are talking about, they are complex, and we got to integrate citizens to the process of innovation. And if we have simple model where you can create a virtual city that every citizen can see, it's a city which is in 3 dimensions, and then they will be able to relate to, yeah, these are the 5 things we are thinking about as an intervention, maybe at a state level, maybe at a city level. What is the impact of the interventions, not only next year, but 20 years down the line, 30 years down the line? I think the life of cities can be made much better for citizens, and the various changes we talk about at state level, city level, can be made much more objective, and the impact of policies and decisions can be understood and appreciated by experiencing them through such models.
Okay, that's very interesting. Vinayak already has told us what keeps him awake at night, but Sunil, what keeps you awake at night?
I think the same thing that keeps him awake at night. It's a fact. I think unless we get the right power in the country and electricity distributed into every single village, none of the infrastructure requirements that this country needs will be able to be realized. The second thing, and there's the second thing, is skill development. I believe today we are teaching our students technologies which are already outdated. 3 years ago, nobody had heard of mechatronics. And that is, in a way, the future. We are still teaching in our schools and our universities stuff that we were taught 20 years ago. Look at the classical blue collar. The blue collar worker no longer actually exists in modern manufacturing. Modern manufacturing is going to look completely different, indeed is very different from what we have been used to. And people talk very easily about leapfrogging into the Industry 4.0 age. I think the biggest hurdle to leapfrogging is going to be skill development. And if this country is looking at growing its share of manufacturing from 15% to 25%, we're talking about a huge amount of capital expenditure that is going to have to come in order to deliver that contribution to GDP. I mean, 15% of 2 trillion today is 300 billion. Assuming in the 5 or 10 years you move from a 2 trillion to a 4 trillion, 25% of that is a trillion. We're talking about a 700 billion contribution to GDP through manufacturing, which means maybe 3 times, 4 times that amount in terms of capital investment. Now, if you're looking at that kind of investment, where are we going to get the skills for it? Have we got the technologies for it? And do we have the infrastructure for it? And while Make in India is absolutely the only way to get inclusive growth in the country, inclusive growth will happen only if manufacturing moves out into the villages and the smaller towns and is not only restricted to areas where there's adequate infrastructure. So we have a huge problem ahead of us in terms of setting the foundations right before we can actually start getting to where we want to get to.
Okay, I am going to put 3 bullet points to the audience, and I'd like you to raise your hands about the biggest threats that you feel Indian cities are going to face in the next 20 years. I believe that the biggest threat is the challenge of managing healthcare. I think that's going to be, without breaking the bank, how can people who are not so wealthy address the issue of healthcare? Those who agree with this, please raise your hands. Yes, of course. Okay, so very few people think that healthcare is the biggest issue. I believe that it's going to be the biggest issue that's going to confront us. How many of you think that electricity is going to be the biggest challenge for Indian cities? Okay, more than healthcare, but still very few. How many of you think water is going to be the biggest challenge in cities? Okay, full house. And we have only spoken of water in a very fleeting kind of a way. Okay. Okay, I'm going to open this to the house, and please identify yourselves before you ask the question. Are there any questions?
I'm Baba Steve, and I'm from United States. I was born and raised here in Delhi, and I left about 45 years ago. And luckily, I come back here. So please forgive me. You people are great and wonderful.
You'll have to put your mic a little closer to your mouth. We can't hear you.
Should I start again? Okay. I'm Baba Steve, and I raised from Delhi, went to Maulana Azad Medical College, and I've been living in the United States for more than 45 years. And you people are all great. I got all the education from here. And I tell you, if we change, we have to change ourselves. And number one, we have 1.2 billion population, as you all know. And about 400 million people, they are well-to-do. Then 400 million people, a little below, that make $200 to $1,000 a month. And then 500 million people practically don't know where they're doing. So the responsibility comes to about 500 million people to teach another 500 million people. So you all have to become awareness, consciousness. Otherwise, it's going to be disaster. In 2020, you can talk about water, you talk about health, and the responsibility is gone. And I feel very sorry because I come here and I see the cities are dirty, and that's not fair because you are making yourself living there. So change yourself here, become conscious.
Got it.
It's basically what we are conditioned unconsciousness, and we are blaming another people.
Right, sir.
So please, I request you that let's become conscious so we can show the world what we are.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you. Madam.
Hi, my name is Vaijayanthi. I work in Bangalore. I work for Biocon. Vanitha, you know the state Bangalore is in at this point in time. I would believe the biggest crisis for most cosmopolitan cities across India today is, while the infrastructure and the social needs are there, the huge divide it's causing within communities. And if I look at Bangalore, it's completely marginalized the local communities. There is a complete distancing of the whole society across India from what is traditionally Indian. And that's caused the disharmony in where we live today. Our children don't care about the communities we live in. We don't care about the water. And you talked about employability and skill development. I hire people from the local communities across the border states in Bangalore in my plant. And yet, I am not really able to provide them a future that an IT company can provide. And that, I think, would be the biggest thing for the future, and not the rest of it, I would believe, is still something that the government or bodies like what you talked about should do. But socially, I think we are on a demise.
Oh dear, that's very, very pessimistic. I'm not sure that I entirely agree with all that. Pradeep bhai?
Hello. Sorry, I'm Pradeep Mehta. I head a think tank called CUTS. I think there is a structural issue which was raised by Vinayak, the implementation of Article 74. And if you compare it with 73, which is about panchayats, 73 is done far better. And Vinayak, the problem is what we've understood. I mean, we've agitated for it for a long time. In fact, even ministers telling us that, why don't you file a writ petition? As if a writ petition would have been able to generate the desirable outcomes. May not have. You may have got an order, but implementation of many orders in India remains still a dream. Now, there is an issue of political maturity also at the same time, and I'm looking at it very objectively rather than the way it was envisioned, 73rd and 74th both. If you compare the both, then you would probably understand in terms of the political economy as to why 73rd has been implemented far better than 74th, though there is still a lot of things which are lacking. So we go back to the original question then, who will be in charge of this whole smart cities, Amrut, etc., etc., etc. So it has to be through the existing machinery, which includes the state government. And by and large, the state governments are hand-holding and, not only hand-holding the urban bodies, but as well as literally running them from the state capitals. So given that situation and given the kind of political maturity which exists in terms of seeing that 74 is not going to be implemented in its true spirit, how do we go ahead? I think that is the challenge, Aditi.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
It's a tough nut to crack, Pradeepji, but I think part of the answer will lie with private financing. People like Vishwavir here from the banking system. See, the moment you have created the SPV will then go to private markets and start raising private capital to implement the projects, because the central government transfers under smart city, as you know, are minuscule. They're like enough to prepare DPRs or detailed project reports or something else. So the real economic capitalization of plans of cities is going to happen in these SPVs with private capital. And private capital is going to demand certain rock solid contracts between the SPV and the municipal corporation or the local civic authority, whatever it is. And it is in that process of attracting capital where private capital demands that you sign on a piece of paper that water cess will be collected, or that property taxes will be reformed, or titles will be given, or electricity will not be given free. It is in the attraction of private capital that will demand certain strong terms to come in and finance city infrastructure, that I would now be positive about these reforms being pushed, not willingly, but by default, or maybe if one is positive, by design. So that is the way I'm thinking now this thing is going to evolve. I don't know, others may have different thoughts.
Dr. Chowdhury, if I could ask you, are we looking in the future at a stronger state, or are we looking in the future at a state that is willing itself to disappear when it comes to governing cities?
So whether the states will become stronger or weaker?
No, state, as in the state structure.
Okay.
Are we looking at a stronger state structure, a stronger government, a tougher government? Or are we looking at progressively a government that's ceding power and is ceding control? Because, I mean, in a country where water has to be delivered through trains, that's a spectacular failure of the state system.
Correct. I think, when we look at India as a nation and all these states being subsystems, if they are totally empowered, I think we are going to have a problem, because we got to look at the problem also at national level. So I think there got to be certain things where it got to be a national consensus, and states got to compromise some of their demands, and overall net I think it's going to be beneficial for everybody. I think many problems that we have today, it's also because whether you talk about state level decisions or central government level decisions, our ability to involve citizens, we do not have a structured collaboration platform where you can interact with citizens and you can make them a part of decision-making process. So I think, to me, that appears to be a more fundamental problem to be solved than just saying, should state have more power or less power?
I think there was a question from this side. Yes, sir.
So, Aditi, when you were talking about the problems, like you talked about water, electricity, and the health, I was just thinking, like, why do these all we are talking about? And I was thinking, when we are talking about cities and the states, one of the things which has always been happening, and it's not stopping in near future, is like migration of people from villages to city. And what I see all around when I go to Silampur and all those areas, people establish their houses anywhere, and then they start stealing from somewhere or the other, and it's not because they want to, but it's because we have not planned for. So one other issue which we need to start understanding is low-cost housing. And I just wanted to bring it in front and also want to understand from you all, like, where do you put this perspective also on this list of problems, and where are we on making sure that these people get planned houses? So I personally believe like all these water, electricity is happening issues because we are not planning it in advance, and when it happens, so like right now I know Gurgaon is in this dire conditions of water because all the builders kept on building but no one thought about it. So just want to hear your thoughts about it.
Maybe.
So I want to step back a little bit because, all the problems that all of us have raised and everyone, no one's going to say housing is not a problem or, electricity is not a problem, water is not a problem, healthcare is not. They're all challenges. And so when we actually looked at, if I go back a decade, IBM first coined the phrase smarter planet. And the whole genesis of that was you need to be a smarter planet because your demand for resources, especially in the growing world, is going to outstrip the supply. So you've got to use the resources you have in a smarter manner to make it go further. If I step back, one of the things we looked at when the whole 100 smart cities, et cetera, there is no one answer for all. And by the way, if we had a very complex answer, we couldn't afford to implement it everywhere. There is a financial constraint, whether it's municipal bonds, whether it's private funding, whether it's private-public partnerships. And by the way, all of those models, I think, will be necessary. It's not one or the other, right? So it really comes down to prioritization. No different than any of us running a company on any given day. You've got 10 things you need to do, so how do you prioritize? And as part of the American-Indian government collaboration, we looked at 3 cities. Vizag, Allahabad, and Ajmer were viewed as the cities that the 2 countries would collaborate on. And when we did our work, we found that for Vizag, the biggest impact to their local GDP would be an emergency management system because that affected the city in a very big way. So it sort of bubbled up on the priority list because if you address that early, then you could impact a lot of, whether it was city resources or agriculture. Allahabad, one of the things that bubbled up to the top, both based on citizen as well as the fact that it was a historical, was solid waste management. It was viewed as a critical, important for the city. And for Ajmer, it was about how do you manage tourism, because that would be a huge source of, again, impacting the local economy. Now, this is not just the one thing, but, and in fact, back to the point that was made earlier, we did a citizen survey in Surat. And the citizens came up with a set of priorities. So if we go through and look at the different areas, I guess my submission would be a lot of these, you can take them in bite-sized pieces, prioritize for the community what is going to have the best impact, both in terms of quality of life, but also quality of economy, because that affects the quality of life again. And then in terms of funding, whether it's public funding, in the United States, 40% of all development funding comes from municipal bonds. And again, when you look at the bond market here, particularly if it is a government bond, but it may not be an answer today, but it has to be for these cities to be sustainable over a period of time with private financing participation, you've got to get to a stage where there is sustainability for it.
So in one sentence, where's the money, honey? I think on that note, we'll have to close this session. There are going to be cities, and it's not going to be easy, but maybe the only way to look at it is to be optimistic about it and say that it'll all work out fine in the end. So thank you very much for being a wonderful audience, and thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am.
Very, very interesting.
Can we have a huge round of applause, please? I would request none other than one of the most ravishing beauties, Ms. Preetha Reddy, to kindly grace the stage and present the set of mementos to our esteemed panelists. Can we have a round of applause for Ms. Preetha Reddy? Ma'am, Ms. Vanitha Narayanan. We can do with a huge round of applause. Come on, ladies and gentlemen. Miss Aditi Phadnis. दोस्तों तालियां बजते रहनी चाहिए. Thank you. Mr. Sunil Mathur. Mr. Chandan Chowdhury. And Mr. Vinayak Chatterjee. Ladies and gentlemen, this 10th edition of Mindmine Summit is running beautifully, and you can hashtag us on Twitter at hashtag Mindmine2016. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us in this session.